Hi, welcome to the Gemara on Daf Dalet Amud Bet. We're starting 6 lines up from the bottom. Dechui alma miha Megillah b'Shabbat lo karinan. According to everyone agrees that nonetheless we do not read Megillah on Shabbat. My taima, what's the reason? I'll put this question in red so that you notice that it's a question. So what's the reason? Amar Rabba. Rabba says, he introduces the answer. Hakol chayavin b'kriyat Megillah, ve'in hakol b'ki'in b'mikra Megillah. Everyone is obligated in reading Megillah, and not everyone is an expert in reading Megillah. Gzeira shama yitzlana biyado, ve'elach etzel baki lilmod. It's a gzeira, it's an enactment, it's a protective enactment, lest you take it, meaning the Megillah, in your hand, and walk to an expert to learn. V'yavirena arba amot b'reshut harabim. And in so doing, you would carry the Megillah 4 amot in a public domain, meaning you might do that on Shabbat without an eruv. You'll notice that I skipped the words if it's kiyat shofar. Those words are in parentheses. In general, we skip parentheses in the Gemara. We'll talk more in class about why those parentheses are there and how to figure out what to say when you get to that part. V'hainu tama de shofar, v'hainu tama de lulav. And that is also the reason for shofar, meaning that's also the reason we don't blow shofar on Shabbat. And that is the reason for lulav, meaning that's also the reason that we don't shake a lulav on Shabbat. Rav Yosef Amar, Rav Yosef says, and this also introduces an answer, because the eyes of the poor are lifted to the reading of Megillah. That's the literal translation. It means that poor people are very attuned to when the Megillah is being read, because that is when they ask for tzedakah. Rashi develops this idea a little further. We'll look at that inside when we get to it in Chavruta and Shiur. Tanya Nami Hachi. There is also a breita to support this idea of Rav Yosef's. Put Tanya Nami Hachi since it's a proof. I'll change that color. Afal pisha amru kfarim makdimin liyom haknisa, govin bo bayom, umechalkin bo bayom. Even though they said that kfarim, the villages, can read earlier, can move their reading to the market day that precedes it, they collect the money on that day and they distribute the money on that day. So this is meant, again, as a proof, a Tanaitic proof for Rav Yosef's point. I'm going to change the color of the writing to red so you'll realize that it's Tanaitic. Afal pisha amru. The Gemara has a question about the way the breita is phrased. What do you mean, even though they said? Adrabba, mishum da amru. Right? Adrabba, on the contrary, it should say because they said, meaning it's because they allowed them to read earlier that they give out the money early and that they collect the money early and distribute the money early. Oops, tamru hu. Sorry. Ella, rather, meaning rather, this is what the Breita really should say. Ho'il ve'amru shekfarim maktimin liyom haknisa. Since they said that the kfarim can move the reading earlier to the Yom HaKnisa, govin bo bayom, they can collect money on that day, umechalkin bo bayom, and give it out on that day. Mipnei she'eneihem shel aniyim nesuot b'mikra Megillah. Because the eyes of the poor are raised to Megillah reading. In other words, the poor expect money when Megillah reading happens, so we've arranged things so they can be simultaneous. I'm actually going to put a comma there. Aval simcha ina noheget ela bismana. However, happiness, the mitzvah associated with joy on Purim, those are only enacted in their proper time. Those can only be on their proper dates. They can't be moved earlier. My first question to you for your homework is what's the Gemara's first question and what are the answers to that question? Amar Rav. Rav said, Megillah bismana korinota afil biachid, shelo bismana ba'asara. Megillah, when it's read in its proper time, may be read even by an individual. When it's read not in its proper time, it requires 10 people. Rav Asi Amar, Rav Asi said, Ben Bismana, Ben Shelo Bismana, Ba'asara. Whether Megillah is read in its proper time, or whether it is read not in its proper time, it requires 10. Your second question is to please look at the Rashis on Bismana and Lo Bismana and translate, figure out what Rashi is saying about why you might or might not need 10 for Megillah reading, why that's connected to the date at all. Hava uvda, hayama aseh, literally, a story happened, a thing happened. V'chashlei Rav lahad Rav Asi. And Rav, in fact, was concerned for the opinion of Rav Asi, meaning even though Rav thought that you didn't need 10 for reading Bismana, he still went looking for 10 Bismana, which doesn't necessarily prove that Rav paskins like Rav Asi, but it's worth noting at least that Rav, in practice, behaved in accordance with the opinion of Rav Asi. Umiyamar Rav hachi, and did Rav actually say this? Veha Amar Rav Yehuda Berei de Rav Shmuel Bar Shilat Mishmei de Rav. Sorry, I'm going to stop and put this in red because it's the question. And the Veha Amar introduces the challenge proof. I'll put that in red also. Almost all of it. Veha Amar, so didn't Rav Yehuda, the son of Rav Shmuel Bar Shelat, say in the name of Rav? So don't we have this other statement of Rav's, basically? Purim shechaliyot b'Shabbat, Erev Shabbat zmanam. When Purim falls out on Shabbat, so the 14th is Shabbat, Erev Shabbat is their time. Erev Shabbat zmanam. What do you mean Erev Shabbat is, I'll do question mark, exclamation mark. What do you mean Erev Shabbat is their time? V'ha Shabbat zmanam. No. Shabbat is actually their time, right? If you think that you need to read on the 14th, then the 14th is Shabbat. So Erev Shabbat is not zmanam. Zmanam hu, sorry. Elalav. Rather no. Hachika amar. Here's what it's really saying. Shelo bizmanam kizmanam. Not in its time is like in its time. Mazmanam afil biachid, just as zmanam, just as when Megillah is read in its proper time, you can read it even as an individual. Af shelo bizmanam afil biachid, even not in its proper time, you can read it as an individual. So taken as a whole, right? Meaning the Gemara is ultimately saying this is what that statement, right? This statement of Rav's, right? Mishmei de Rav. So this statement of Rav's actually means this, the Hachika Amar. And the Hachika Amar is saying that just as you can read Megillah without 10 in its proper time, so too you can read Megillah without 10 not in its proper time. That's a contradiction because that's not what Rav seems to be saying above. Lo inyan mikra Megillah ba'asara. No, this is not being said. This second statement, right, this Mishmei de Rav and the Hachika Amar, that's not being said about reading Megillah with 10. Ela mai erev Shabbat zmanam. Rather, what did this statement mean when it said that? What would Rav mean when he said Erev Shabbat is the time for cities to read Megillah when Purim falls out, when the 14th falls out on Shabbat? What did he mean by saying Erev Shabbat is their time? La'afuke means a Rebbe. It was to exclude the opinion of Rebbe, de Amar, who said, Hawil v'nidchu ayarot mimkoman, yidchu liyom haknisa, who said that since the ayarot are being moved from their proper time anyway, right? Since you're moving, you can't read on Shabbat, so that cities are going to read on the 14th, which is Erev Shabbat. At that point, the point at which you're moving them anyway, yidchu liyom haknisa, let them be moved to Thursday. HaKamash malan de Erev Shabbat zmanamhu. So this is coming to teach us that Erev Shabbat is actually the time for cities to read, meaning that was Rav's opinion. He did not agree with the opinion of Rebbe. And the final question is, remind yourself about Rebbe's opinion, how we brought in Rebbe's opinion to begin with, and why that was. Okay, we'll pause here. This is the end of the video and the homework, but I'm going to write up the questions, and you'll have a link to that as well.